Welcome, everybody. We're going to start sharp. My name is Christian Fuhrmeister. I would like to thank the Lost Art Foundation for inviting me to chair this panel discussion. I'm going to introduce the speakers to you in a second. For the, let's say, general setup of this evening, we do have, and this is a very great thing and a good thing, we do have 120 minutes at our disposal. And I would like to make best use of this. So the idea is to touch upon a number of issues here on the panel, but then also to open the discussion to engage with you. Unfortunately, the online people should come here to ask questions. They can't do via YouTube, as you know, but those in the room, and I also see we have some students, so that is the next generation to carry on the work, and because of that we'll have to come up with a number of good proposals, hopefully. So I would like to introduce the specialists, the experts. This is a true expert panel here, starting with Olaf Hamann. He studied international politics and Northern European studies in Moscow from 1938 to 1988. Then he studied library science at the Humboldt University from 1991 to 1993. Already before reunification, he worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the GDR, and since 1919 he's working in the State Library, since 2007 as head of the Department of Eastern Europe. He has done many things in the domain of the virtual library of Slavic studies. He has been instrumental in organizing the return of book collections from Georgia in 1996, Armenia in 1998, Ukraine 2001, and so on. And he has been part of the German-Russian library dialogue just mentioned, and is member of the German-Ukrainian Expert Commission. So this is the first experts in this setting. So feeling at home in your own building. Then next, Wolfgang Eichwede. And I don't think, am I mistaken? You weren't really formally introduced. So this is maybe a good thing for those few people in the room that may not know you. So he studied history, politics, philosophy, and Slavic studies in Tübingen, Heidelberg, and Berlin. He became a professor for politics and contemporary history of Eastern Europe in Bremen in 1974. He was retired in 2007. His research areas we heard a lot about, so we don't have to go into detail here, but what is important is, let's say, the institutional background, founding the Forschungsstelle Osteuropa in 1982. And this is maybe the legacy, or it is the prehistory also of the Koordinierungsstelle to a certain regard. He is also associated with the human rights organization Memorial. And he has another facet that we didn't manage, and that is the Samizdat archive, so collecting dissident literature in Bremen and elsewhere. And this is everything I would like to add to the existing knowledge here. Welcome. I now turn to Nawojka Cieślińska-Lobkowicz. She is a Polish art historian and independent provenance researcher. In the 1990s, she was the culture counselor at the Polish embassy in the Federal German Republic and founder of the Polish Institute in Düsseldorf and director of the Art Museum in Lodz, Łódź. For over 20 years, she has been a private scholar and an expert on Nazi looting of Judaica and Polish-Jewish art collections and on post-war restitution in Europe. And she has published widely in this field. Next to her is Ulrike Schmiegelt-Rietig, who studied art history, Eastern European history, and Slavic philology in Kiel and in Moscow. Her PhD on the image program of the Vladimir Cathedral in Kiev, a late 19th century Neo-Byzantine mosaics and frescoes, was published in 2018. In between, she did a museum assistant work at the German Historical Museum, and she worked in the German-Russian Museum in Berlin, Karlshorst, and for the Stiftung Deutsche Kinemathek. She was part of Wolfgang Eichwede's project from 2012 to 2014, Russische Museen im Zweiten Weltkrieg, Stiftung Preußischer Kulturbesitz, and she has been for 5 years the provenance researcher in Wiesbaden for Hessen. And since April 2020, she's working here full-time for SPK in Potsdam, Preußische Schlösser und Gärten. Welcome. We have 2 more guests on the panel. First, Konstantin Akinsha, who all of you who attended the conference have heard him a couple of times because he's an outspoken independent art historian, curator, and journalist. He graduated from Moscow University in 1986. He did a PhD in art history at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland in 2012. He received the George Polk Award for Cultural Reporting in 1991. He served in 1999 to 2000 as the Deputy Research Director, Art and Cultural Property of the Presidential Advisory Commission on Holocaust Assets in the United States. He has a broad curatorial record, including a number of famous large exhibitions. I only name a few: Russian Modernism, Cross Currents of German and Russian Art, 1907 to 1917, Neue Galerie, New York, 2015, Permanent Revolution, Ukrainian Art Today, Ludwig Museum, Budapest, 2018, and In the Eye of the Storm, Modernism in Ukraine, 1900 to the 1930s, traveling exhibition from Madrid, Cologne, Brussels, Belvedere, Bratislava, and London. He published a number of books, and for the younger around us, I may single out Operation Beutekunst, Germanisches Nationalmuseum 1995, 1995, and the AAM Guide for Provenance Research, being the co-author in 2001. Welcome. And finally, last, we have Adam Ganz. He is professor of screenwriting at Royal Holloway University of London and an associate of its Holocaust Research Institute. Together with Natalie Neumann, he they partnered in a provenance research project on the art collection of Felix Ganz, 1869 to 1944 in Mainz, a major collection of carpets and Middle East and Asian art objects. And I think Emily Löffler, in her position at the Landesmuseum Mainz, also had a role to play in this regard. And this project is now finished, and I could point out the article the two of them, Natalie Neumann and Adam Ganz, authored for the Journal for Art Market Studies in 2020, explaining this project funded by the German Lost Art Foundation. So he is perhaps the single outstanding person to have turned a Lost Art Foundation research project into a musical theater piece. So we will also talk about, let's say, potential other different outcomes from research other than restitutions or producing research. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming this panel of experts. my idea is to be superfluous, to be entirely in the background, because the discussion is evolving on its own. However, to begin with, maybe some input is needed. And my first question is a two-part question, and maybe we'll simply follow this succession. And the question is twofold. Both are looking back. First, really looking back to the topic of the conference, immediate post-war period, 1945. So what are, in your opinion, the lessons learned today, looking back at 1945? And the second level, much more to our current conference here, what did we learn in the past 2 days? What was the most remarkable things that you have would like to single out regarding yesterday and today? And maybe we'll then prepare a number of ideas and perspectives that some of you would like to pick on later on in the second half of the discussion. So, Mr. Hamann, please, what is your point?
I think to me, as a person born long after World War II, I started working in the library in 1990, and when I was faced with the problems the library had with its historical collection, I was very much surprised that the war is not over, that we every day are faced with the losses of the World War II. And yesterday, my deputy director explained to you that we have great losses. We have 730,000 books that did not return from the evacuation. And these volumes you can feel every day when you work in the library. So the war is still, it is not ongoing, but it's still to feel the war, to feel the results of war. I didn't stop to work with it, but I tried to establish contact to colleagues in Russia, in Ukraine and Belarus, first of all, and to ask them whether they face the same problems in their collection. And this was the basis for a cooperation between librarians. And for me, the lesson of the past 35 years is that specialists find a common language, and they can come to results when they discuss the problems openly and when they try to stay on the professional basis. This has always given me a hope, and it has shown me some results, not only to establish this German-Russian librarians dialogue. It was much more difficult to establish the same context on the same level to Ukrainian or Belarusian librarians. They see this from a quite different point of view. But with Russian colleagues, it was quite okay to discuss all these questions, what they have lost, what we have lost, and to find ways how we can use modern technologies to fill the gap, how we can use, we started with microfilming, and now the past years we have discussing digitization problems of historical books, manuscripts, and so on, to bring it back to the scientists what was unavailable when we started our dialogue. That, I would say, was the first and main lesson we have had.
Great, thank you.
2 points. Perhaps I'm the only in this room who is still born in the Second World War. I'm born in 42. And I remember, not in a very different way, but nevertheless I remember not the war, but the end of the war. I remember all the destroyed cities. I'm born in the southern part of Germany at the Lac de Constance am Bodensee, and in 48, I as a young guy, 6 years old, we looked to the Switzerland, And our friends in Switzerland celebrated 300 years of peace from 1648 till 1948. And on the Alpen, on the Alpen, you have seen over all the mountains, fires, celebrating their peace. We in Germany, on the other side of the Lac de Constance, admired this land. This was the first time how we in Germany overcame the war, how we tried to lost the heritage of the war. This time I thought we are able to do so. Later on, my skepticism became greater and greater. Nevertheless, in the early 50s, the Jewish line of my family, my Jewish relatives, they came back from the United States in the time of the war, and they have been in France, arrested in the concentration camps. The most of them, they didn't survive, but nevertheless, the few who survived came back to Germany. And in this time, I have the feeling of some hope that we in Germany are possible to change us themselves. This feeling dominated in the coming decades. As a still young student or young scientist, I supported with enthusiasm Willy Brandt and the so-called policy of détente, which in this time I already understood not only as a policy of détente between the states, but as an opening of the societies on both sides of the Iron Curtain. In any case, I had the feeling that our countries, our continent is able to learn something. In spite of all the setbacks, in spite of all the disappointment, nevertheless, I thought we are going forward. We are more or less try to building a liberal society or a free society. Insofar, the most part of my life is defined through some sort of optimism, in spite of the fact that I belonged to the student revolution and criticized my society, and I fought against them. Nevertheless, I thought we are going in a sense of freedom forward. Today, my skepticism is growing, and it's not only my skepticism. In spite, I have been convinced that my country, Germany, would be united in young years. I have been convinced. I didn't believe that it's possible that the Soviet Union will have a collapse. It was impossible for me to imagine. Nevertheless, all happened. But today, I think we are confronted with the fact that my optimism in the past 60 years was not right. That we don't fulfill our own hopes. And therefore, I'm looking in the future not only with skepticism. Nevertheless, I have the feeling we are not allowed to give up. This is my contradiction, my internal contradiction. The most important lesson you asked, in spite of the fact that for a lot of time we thought in our politicians, and we have the hope that they are able to solve our problems. In our field we discuss. In our field we discuss. I think we are better. We, that means the people or the human beings are living in the culture or in the science. Sometimes in the science. There are also other examples. But nevertheless, I think we must do our work. And we are not allowed to hope for the politicians or to hope for the policy. And they says, in spite of the fact that my young daughter is a politician, and she's a member of our parliament, even with 36 years. Sometimes it's more difficult for her to speak with me than for me to speak with her.
Okay. Maybe we can leave it at this for the time being. No, but I very much like this tension on this let's say unsatisfied, and because this is very, very to the point. Nawojka, please.
I do not like to speak about personal things, but I have to. I just was born in the 50s, in the early 50s. And of course, this is the generation after the war, having, let's say, the family which partly suffered and also was murdered under the German occupation. My Jewish great-father was murdered in Auschwitz. But my mother and his daughter used to have always at home German literature. This is what I want to say about me. Then, because I was, of course, in communist Poland, I started to be relatively quickly under the underground movement, under communist movement. But I had a very great happiness to study in the 70s by the great professor of history of art, Jan Białostocki, whose name probably here partly is known. And this is important, he used to say in our talks, just because I was his assistant, about two things, namely about Raphael of Czartoryski, that he was once asked when he was in Princeton by his colleagues, or informed that he saw somewhere this painting, so he has to be quiet, it exists. And the second thing which he told me, and which I remember, namely that in the late 70s, Professor Białostocki was the first person who informed the Western world that the Berlinka from Berlin is in Krakow Jagiellonian University library. And he had a lot of problems for that, and he could not travel for a few years and so on. So these were two reasons what for I decided to accept, let's say, the proposal to go to the Polish embassy still in Bonn. We had our house in Marienburg in Köln, just to be the cultural attaché. And by chance, I was present at the first negotiations about looted art between Poland and Kriegsbeding verlagerte Kulturgüter, this nomenclatura, this terrible language. And so that this is the case, but now let me say something, or better to say, I was not present today in the morning because I wanted to write something, because I have to be understood precisely. And then I will read few sentences before I come back to, let's say, free talk. Let me start with a quote from Lech Wałęsa. I do not want, but I have to. I did not want to participate in this discussion, but when several respected speakers from Poland refused the invitation of the German Art Looted Foundation, I simply cannot imagine that there will be no Polish voice here. But it is necessary to emphasize my opinion on restitution and provenance research is in my country unpopular as independent one and since many years critical of the Polish authorities' policy with regard to these questions. However, it is not the fear of criticism in Poland, but the lecture by Professor Eichwede that prevented me from participating in this today's discussion. Or not prevented, I was thinking, I'm here, but because your subject inevitably makes our discussion highly political. And I've been for years of the opinion that to do something meaningful on my or on our field, should keep far away from politics as possible. Not from the politics in general, but from the narrow-minded, short-sighted politics. And as such, I consider the political position on issues related to cultural goods displaced as a result of the war, represented not only by the Polish side, but also by the German authorities. In the case of the latter, not only in German-Polish relations, but also in German-Russian relations until Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Regarding the latter, I will only say that I have watched with regret the German-Russian Museum dialogue. It has practically reduced the nations and countries of the former Soviet Union and their suffering and war losses to the Russian state alone, effectively ignoring Ukraine, even more Belarus and the Baltic states, not to mention the Jewish communities and Jewish collections there. After the Russian Duma law, which we are talking about, which nationalized the Beutekunst, the so-called Beutekunst we are talking about, was in the 19th century the main word used by the German medias. The German-Russian Museums dialogue was dedicated to the numerous collections and artifacts from Germany taken to Russia by the Soviet trophy brigades and investigation of the Nazi looting in the Soviet Union. This activity was highly strengthened by the reconstruction of the Amber Room in 2003, guested as Gutenwillens, paid by the Ruhrgas AG, which from the today political perspective could be called cultural Nord Stream 2. For the Polish observer, this evident German foresight to curry favor with Russia within the museum's dialogue was volens nolens associations with the historical German-Russian liaison over Poland and the not uncommon in public opinion in Germany that the Second World War in the East had not really begun until the end of June 1941 with the attack on the Soviet Union. The impression may have been reinforced by the fact that there was no similar initiative as the German-Russian Museums dialogue from politicians, unfortunately after neither of the negotiation parties, to promote cooperation between German and Polish museums, libraries and archives with regard to the joint investigation of Nazi loot in occupied Poland within its pre-war borders, and the fate of cultural property moved in both directions as a result of the war, with the changed borders of Poland and Germany after Yalta and the Potsdam Conference, and also taking into account the existence of two German states until 1990. As early as 2003, I wrote about the mutual deafness of Polish and German politicians on the issues that interest of us here. In bilateral Polish-German relations, it is known under one word, Berlinka, an extremely valuable collection of Zemelia from the Prussian library found in 1945 in Lower Silesia, Krzeszów, and since this time stored in the Jagiellonian Library in Krakow. Yes, this is the end. Okay. This is the end. No, so sorry. Yeah. Sorry. It will be shortly. It will be shortly. I do not intend to deal with this matter here. I will only say that today, almost 35 years after the first Polish-German negotiations on these matters in which I took part, things have only gotten worse. The German side insists on a literal interpretation of international law, according to which Berlin should be returned to Berlinka, should be returned to Berlin. As an auxiliary argument, it is meticulous in collecting a package of objects taken from Poland to the German Reich and identified in recent years as part of provenance research in the Bundesrepublik. These are, as far as you know, mainly books, which would be used to exchange to Berlinka or for Berlinka. The Polish side argues that, according to Polish law, Berlinka is the property of the Polish state and emphasizes its moral right to it through intensive research of Poland's war losses. The Peace Party, ruling in Poland from 2015 to 2023, also included to the Polish war losses dispersed artworks from German museums in Wrocław and Gdańsk. At the same time, Poland ignores to conduct provenance research in public collections, to which it committed itself by signing the Washington Conference Principles in 1998 and the Theresian Declaration in 2009. The only restitution of works of art in this respect, the landscape of Ornans by Gustave Courbet from the National Museum in Warsaw, to the heirs of the Jewish collector from Hungary, Baron May Lippert Herzog, was in Poland never made public.
Okay, thank you. Ulrike?
I think I will now save the time my four speakers have spent. Lessons learned from 1945. Well, I was born long after the end of the war, but I spent a whole portion of my professional life studying this. And what I did actually study was pattern of narratives on the history of the Second World War, starting with the narratives on the Holocaust, understanding that the Holocaust is not that much a topic in other parts of Europe and the world as it is in Germany, and kind of understanding at some point that there is a development in how narratives evolve. So like 3 or 4 steps. The beginning, every society after the war needs a phase of reconstruction and telling each other that we were all resistance. That was something that was everywhere. So that was a very sophisticated approach to the subject of Second World War. Coming to provenance research, it came very much back down to earth, I would say. Like we had the word of positivism today from one of the speakers. And I'm kind of grateful that I'm doing this kind of positivist work, because it gives me an opportunity to really study the files and to do something historians would rather not say, try to find out what really happened. I think that is very much a point in provenance research, like trying to really discover what was going on. Lessons learned from the conference. There was again this image of patterns that repeat all over again, like hearing on the histories in Hungary, in Czechoslovakia, like how claims were treated after the war, like people claimed their things and how that was treated by the administrations. That is something I feel like it is all the same everywhere. Like people try to regain their property, be it cultural goods or something else, and administrations try to prevent them from getting it, actually, with interesting, I would say, reasons. And being a museum person, I think I'm the only true museum person here on the board. I am. I'm thinking of the situation of museums, and I was interested it was interesting to hear that, again, there was a pattern in how museums acted at the beginning of the war with this like trying to evacuate things from the houses, from the museums, and store them away, bring them to safe spaces, which it felt like, at least in these 2 days, nobody really could make it, except of the Städel Museum, which I envy, I must say. They managed to do this early on, and they managed to write lists and store them in safes and strong rooms, so that even these lists and documents survived the war. My colleague Anne is we have this experience that all these documents are lost because the archives were not cared for. So that is the mess I'm dealing with every day in my positivist tries to find out what happened. Thank you. I think that is enough time for you.
Thank you. In difference to Wolfgang, who was optimist all his life, I was optimist for a very short period of time. This period of time coincided with developed stage of Gorbachev perestroika and finished very soon after the fall of the Soviet Union. But that was a period. And for us, for people of my generation, it was the real period of the end of the Second World War. We were mistaken. We thought that the war is finished, that walls are fallen, and we will live in new world. In 1990, me and my colleague Grigory Kozlov published the first article about storages of trophy art in the Soviet museums, which created unbelievable scandal and different repercussions, one of which was appearance of mentioned today Klaus Goldman on our threshold. And Klaus was very disappointed because he did not want to believe that the Schliemann gold is in Moscow, because according to his beliefs, it had to be in Fort Knox in the United States. We were young and naive. We were sure that the problem of trophy art will be solved in 2 months. Of course, we have new democratic Russia and new democratic world around us. That did not happen. During following 35 years, I was working with this problem. It's horrible to admit, but I know Wolfgang for 35 years, and we are friends and collaborators for quite a long period of time. However, I did not work only with Forschungsstelle Osteuropa in Bremen. I worked with other German organizations, like, for example, with the Ministry of Interiors, when you did not have yet the Ministry of Culture. So I am a relic of German history. After this, I worked with Kulturstiftung der Länder, which was my last effort to deal with the topic. And I have very checkered experience. Finally, by the play of fate, both me and Kozlov were involved in only 2 cases of serious restitution of artworks to the Federal Republic of Germany, which took place during these 35 years, which was a private collection or private loot of Bremen drawings, which with a beautiful Dürer watercolor, which Wolfgang showed to you today, which we carried into the Germany of the Federal Republic in Moscow. In the second case, it was the mentioned today stained glasses of Marienkirche in Frankfurt on Oder. Because in 1995, me and Kozlov prepared a report for the Ministry of Interiors, locating finally the stained glasses, which was not very easy, because in the Hermitage special inventories, they were misattributed. Because Russian experts, for some reason, decided that it's not the story of Antichrist, but the story of Christ, which it looks like that it's a common Russian mistake. So these 2 things returned. It's not too much. Of course, Wolfgang was involved in many other restitutions from Ukraine, but what else of serious value came back from Russia? Nothing. Leave aside Germany, Russian Federation, despite the very notion of Holocaust property confiscated by the Nazis is included in the list of exceptions. Did not restitute one serious object belonging to the victims of Holocaust. We have some exception with archives, one exception with private archive, which was an archive of Rosenberg's dealers, Parisian dealers. But it was transactional restitution, which literally was paid. So that's where we are, not too much for 35 years. And I want to stress one thing, that in the further discussion, I want to divide two things. I want to divide the development of scholarship, which is very impressive, and we achieved unbelievable results, which we saw today during the conference and during the reports, and political side of the story, which was mentioned by Wolfgang. I believe that the story with Boite Kunst is one of unbelievable FOPs of German foreign policy during the last 35 years. Partly it was described by Wolfgang, but I have a bit different opinion on the later period, not a period of stern approach, but period of pacification of Russians. And in a sense, I can agree with Nawojka that despite all positive elements of the Russian-German museum dialogue, it created many problems. Because I'm understanding what was Ukrainian reaction to this. Unfortunately, Germans made certain political mistakes. I hope that we will return to this topic later.
Adam, please.
Wow. I was thinking about more generally about restitution, and I thought of something my father said to me as a child. He said, "Wann man dir gibt, dann nimm, wann man dir nimmt, dann schrei." And maybe the whole of the kind of history of the last 80 years, 100 years, 200 years of art, theft and restitution is, as you say, people are not always keen to give back what is in their possession. I'm a storyteller, I guess, and a visitor here, somebody who's benefited enormously in all sorts of ways by the DZK research, both in terms of the detailed work that people have done, the kind of archival work, the effort to tell the stories. But I found myself thinking today about the story, the relationship between stories and pictures, that pictures or objects mean more when they have stories attached to them, but also that sometimes the stories survive and even if the pictures or the art is not discovered, which is what so far has happened with the research that Natalie has been doing with the University of Mainz. But I found myself, I saw the reference to the Sistine Madonna, and I thought of this fantastic essay by Vasily Grossman about the exhibition of the Sistine Madonna in Moscow before it was handed back to Dresden, and both to make the associations that he makes about the painting, about Treblinka, about the kind of future that he hopes for. And it made me really think about the value of art, telling both what he says at the end of the essay, watching it leave, going back to maybe where it belongs, where does art belong? But he said, he wrote it down because I wanted to say something, knowing that there were people many better informed than I am. He said, "Seeing the Sistine Madonna go on her way, we preserve our faith that life and freedom are one, that there is nothing higher than what is human in man. This will live forever in triumph." Well, we hope it will. We were discussing before what piece of art would one take into the bunker. Maybe that's a very good reason to take the Sistine Madonna. from the impression of the conference, I found myself really thinking about the people, the guy in Versailles who is trying to fix the cabinet, you know, and giving up some wine so that he can get hold of some copper wire to mend it, you know, or the people working in Hamburg to try and reconstruct Caspar David Friedrich's clouds. Do you know what I mean? Art makes people do extraordinary things. And I guess somehow remembering what that signifies. Why do people collect it? Why is this the thing that people spend all their money on? Do you know what I mean? When people become extremely rich, when really unpleasant people become extremely rich, they still want to buy incredibly beautiful things. And that's maybe also one of the things that this has made me think about today.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks to the panel for this first round of assessments. The second, and we already have, let's say, many things we could expand on, like you talked about patterns of narratives, you talk about storytelling, so I wonder what's the connection there. I think there's one other element, and Frank Grelka this morning talked about imperial collective biographies. I wonder whether these are also federal collective autobiographies that we have just been witnessing here. But I want to talk about the title of our panel, which is Unresolved Problems in the Repatriation of Cultural Property, bringing us to the present, where we are today, 21st century, 2025. And I wonder whether we should also reflect on the notion of language and terminologies and what this entails. So repatriation is one issue. One could also talk about restitution, recompensation, recognition, return, recovery, and so on and so forth. You know where I'm getting at? That is, what is the kind of language we are using to address cultural property issues? And what are the concepts that are hidden within those words we are using to describe historical processes and our ways of coping with those challenges? And I wonder if this, if we are already empowered with regard to language and the concepts we are using, or whether there is room to grow or room for maneuver to find better expressions, because there are differences between the words. Repatriation assumes there's a nation state and so on. Recognition is yet one form of fair and just solutions, and so on. So we don't have to do this, let's say, on the spot and do this, but I would like to invite you now on the second round on the panel, before we may consider opening this up already. This is us in 2025, having this tainted, complicated history, ambivalent, contentious, problematic with our experiences as professionals and also as human beings, as civic servants, as professionals. What are our ideas of coming to terms with the unresolved problems of cultural property regarding the future, the next 20 years? So looking forward to 2045, when there is going to be the centennial of looking back at the end of the Second World War. So I would like to invite you to ponder, to share your thoughts about where do we stand today and what are the options at our hands that we're facing, regardless of the politicians, for a second. So it's us, among us as the professionals, as the experts. What is the power that we can generate among ourselves to develop language, concepts, ideas, visions that are let's say, better than the problems of the present we are facing right now. So what are the options? Where do we go from here? And we have prepared in the second round, we have 2 inputs, audiovisuals. We have Konstantin, who wants to share a number of images with us, and Adam has a short 1 minute, 45 seconds short film. So we're going to look at those, and I'm going to announce them right now. But I would also like to start with Olaf Hamann, sharing his thoughts about what are things that are feasible, probable, also maybe to be feared of, what has to be prevented at all costs. So what is your ideas about steering us as professionals into the next 20 years of dealing with unresolved issues of cultural heritage?
How long will we discuss this questions?
Well, let's say it's about pitching ideas.
Yes.
It's in order to warm up the audience so that we have many people asking questions. I agree, I don't agree. So we are preparing for what is coming next to engage with the audience.
Okay, we have today already heard from Uwe Hartmann, experts are disappointed by politics. And I must say that is the main idea I wanted to express in my first answer. The experts have to organize the discussion, and they will find a common language. They know what they are talking about. They know have easier access to the things they are working with, and when politicians come inside, then you have other ideas that make obstacles, that interfere in your work, in your professional work. The politics have to follow laws. We also have to follow laws, but we can agree with people. We can find a common language. You lined out that it is very important what we are talking about. And the German nomification of kriegsbedingt verlagerte Kulturgüter, this nearly impossible phrase to translate to any foreign language, is the result of this long discussion what we are talking about. And it is a compromise. It is a political compromise, but specialists do not like such compromise, and they speak more frankly, more open. It is at least what I have in my experience. I probably expect that you have experience close to mine. And when I came to Russia, to Ukraine, and discussed it, I was in the open discussion when everybody was listening. I sometimes felt that this was an obstacle when we were speaking loud. But in the breaks of the discussions, my colleagues usually told me, yes, these are our trophies, and we can talk about trophies, and you do not need to name it another way. And we always found, when we find the interest that culture is a matter for an open society, that is, culture is a matter for the public, and that we, as librarians or museum experts, that we have open access for the public to these cultural assets, then we find a common language and find ways how to fulfill this aim and how to make access to all our collections, and not only to the originals, but we also try to find ways of copying materials so that we can. For books, we have digitization, we have 3D, three-dimensional digitization for museums objects, archival collections can be digitized, and we make it open, accessible for the public, and so the culture becomes an object for anyone who wants to see this. Yeah.
Okay.
And for the prospect for the future, I think to have prospects, we should overcome, first of all, war. We should force our politicians that war is no way out of the discussion of any problems, and we should overcome imperial thinking. I think it is with imperial thinking, when we are confronted with imperial thinking, we end in a catastrophe, and we should not give way to these 2 points, just to say it in 2 words.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think some of proposals are already made, and so far I don't want to repeat them, but nevertheless, I think we should try in the next 20 years, we should try to develop a whole network of new solutions. And I'm in this moment not in a position to define the possible solutions for all aspects of art. But nevertheless, I think we should try to develop new distractions. And if I have in mind the different art, the difference between different artworks. For instance, we have to find or we have to look for solutions. If I have in mind drawings, there are other possibilities or there are less possibilities than I have in mind paintings, for instance. I will repeat a proposal I tried to make in my small speech. If you take the gold of Troja, we have the possibility, perhaps under the umbrella of the UNESCO or of another international institution, to show these artworks for a special time in this, in that, or in a third city. And by this way, we are able to reduce the question of the poor legal ownership. This could be a real possibility. Another I already mentioned, if, for instance, I think it would be the best if the Hermitage would be ready to give up a lot of the works they have out of Germany when there is no possibility and we are not able to find a language in the next 10 years. Nevertheless, or next 20 years, if I have in mind the Hermitage, Russia, then the idea the Hermitage had 20 years ago to build up some sort of a department of the Hermitage in Amsterdam. It could be worthwhile to look for a possibility to build up a department in Berlin and to show in this department things which formerly belonged to Germany, and now they would be open for the German society or for other societies too. There's a third possibility. Nevertheless, some sort of compensation is nevertheless possible. I think we have to look for new constructions, for new forms of learning, of learning and learning. And by this way, I think, maybe in a provocative sense, if there would be a Tiepolo coming from Dresden, now for the next 20 years after the war, in Novosibirsk, it could be a real chance, too. It could be a real chance. And perhaps Novosibirsk would be able to rent for the same time also high, interesting artwork to Dresden. I think to change our mind, we must look after this war, after the old war, the Second World War, and after the present war, we should look for new solutions. The main point would be, I repeat it, to make aus Beute Botschafter, to make out of loot ambassadors. I think these are wonderful words, but nevertheless, it's very difficult, and to some degree, it could be also disappointing to give in or to look for an alternative construction than the old ownership. But more important for me, in a perspective of freedom and in a perspective of peace, is for me how we are able, we, the different societies or nations in Europe, how we are able to learn from the others or from our neighbors and from our former enemies. Nevertheless, I'm not an expert in all the different specters of art, but I think we must try to open our thinking for new ways in the long run.
Agreed.
Yes.
Also, let's say, getting out of the bilateral or unilateral perspectives into a more international, because this has a European dimension after all. So, entirely agreed. Yes.
Only one remark. 2 years ago, I have a very strong discussion with the director of the museum in Senegal. And the main topic of the discussion was how we should give back the artworks of Senegal back to Senegal. And she answered, no, my problem, well, this is also a problem. My problem is how we could get a Picasso, how we could get European works in our culture, how we could learn.
This is the global dimension. We'll stop short of get European homework.
I will be rather short. At first, I want to remind all of you that we are in a very special moment of history. Namely, we probably or maybe stay before the Second Yalta. I suppose that, let's say, when you are talking about 20 years of just of the perspective, and we think about 80 years just behind us, I find this and our, or let's say at least my life experience on this respect is 30 years. And as I told, we are in one way in the worst situation in Russian-German dialogue, this is obvious. In Polish-German, as I told, I find it really in a very bad situation. So I would say at first that the perspective of 20 or 30 years, don't talk about this perspective. Our question is whether, let's say, the liberal democracy will really stay. I do not want to make apocalypse or something like that, but I ask you to have it just in our minds. The second thing is, this I find very important. I agree with you that we see different words even in this conference, the restitution, the recognition. But what I find very interesting, this is the word repatriation. And the repatriation, not just in the definition of repatriation of the people and so on, because this is something, but we can learn in one way from the experience of this colonial repatriation for a very simple reason. At first, how active and how important is such a subject and identity element for, let's say, people or nations, or I don't know how to say, just after many years. But it shows us also very interesting perspective, namely that when we are talking about restitution, that of course we use in a very moment, very precise legal term, and then international law and things like that. If we used the word repatriation, we have to have in a second also the moral dimension, which comes to the idea of what to do with with the objects which are of, how to say, unclear origins or clear origins, but they are somewhere else and so on. So I would really think that it is probably one of the possible perspectives, and to develop it. And the third notion, or the third remark, I suppose that at least in the case of Polish-German relations on the field of provenance research, and I agree with, as I suppose all of you, that that we as specialists, I would say, as experts, have to work together. Of course, you did not mention the word money, because one needs money, so, and for that one needs politics, so I'm sorry. But this is something different. I wish all of you and all of us that we have intelligent, open politics. But the problem is that at least on the small field of Polish-German cooperation, we start in 1 week, something what I want to tell you now, namely completely independently and completely free. We organized, together with a friend of mine and the former scientific director of the Muzeum Narodowe National Museum in Szczecin, and with cooperation with our experienced leading provenance researchers, very independent from politics of both sides, German Streichergespräche, when we want to, how to say, to open the real cooperation, to let people talk together, librarians, museum people, archivers from Germany and from Poland, using and knowing, let's say, on one side, the experience of provenance research, which the German colleagues already collected, and Polish colleagues did not do it, and just to act and to organize a platform where, let's say, the confidence of professional cooperation will be more important than, let's say, politics or fear against or just because of such a cooperation.
Well said. Agreed.
It leaves me without words. What I would like to say is we are now 80 years after the end of the war. And we're still struggling with the very same problems for 80 years, or let's say like for 60 years, because the first 20 years we did not work on that, or hardly work on that. And now there's another war, and the same problem is going to come, maybe not in the same dimensions. Nobody can tell that at the moment, which dimension this will take, but we already see that museums are being looted in Ukraine, and things creep into the market. And we have seen that like now I'm taking the global perspective as well, but just only for short, in Syria or in Iraq, like things that were clandestinely taken out of the ground or stolen from museums were put into the market. And I would like to add another dimension into our discussion, which is not museum and not libraries and not experts, but it's the trade. It's the art dealers, the art trade, who, like, except of a few, like very decent enterprises, do not really care on provenance whatsoever. And even though we do have a law that would like ask the dealers to at least make a short research, a very short one, a look into lost art, for example, very many don't do that. And this will perpetuate our problem forever and ever again, because it is objects from Jewish collections that are still put into the market repeatedly. It is museums objects. It's everything, and this, that is the reason why I would plead to like integrate the dealers, and not only the good ones. These are the good ones, but rather all of them into the discussion and make clear the problem. Because I hardly use the word of repatriation. I'm usually talking about return or restitution depending on the situation. But I would say that there are artworks, cultural goods, that belong to the public and not to private persons. So this needs to be taken out of the market.
And I mean, this is like talking about cultural heritage issues, and it's one-sided to look at museums and not thinking about the trade and the private collectors. Yeah. So you have to, developing the new solutions would need to encompass the whole range of objects. Entirely agreed. Konstantin, maybe this is now the time.
No, I want to,
not yet? Okay, you do.
I want to answer this question.
Go ahead.
And for 20 years, I have my desire and my plan. I know that it will never happen as I wish it. I wish that in 1 year, European Union countries will have strict evacuation protocols, will prepare packing materials, will have bomb shelters, safe storages, and inter-European evacuation plans. Si vis pace para bellum. Ukraine did not have all of the mentioned. Israel probably has part of it, and you can ask about our experiences. It's not idealistic talks, it's very serious danger. Second, maybe not in 10, but in 20 years, I hope the European Union will have strict, uniting, and applicable in all countries law on restitution issues, which will be uniting all European countries and not dividing them, like today we see in the case of Poland and Germany. Because one voice of Europe really needed in this issue, connected to everything, to statute of limitation, to Jewish property, to property stolen during the war, because only in this case it will become effective. The last thing, it's my wish, I hope that Ukrainians will compose a very good list of equivalents, which will include not only Russian Federation, but North Korea, Iran, and Chinese museums. Okay. That is a joke, of course.
So personally, I guess one of the things which connects to the points made earlier is that the work that Natalie did, or that we did, to get to a certain point of some very interesting links to private collections, private archives and whatever, that there are ways that can continue. And I think your point about, I think it's very good that the experts discuss, but sometimes when the experts discuss, they discuss and they come to agreement to keep archives closed, to maintain certain narratives or whatever. So I think the basis of fundamental access to archives is incredibly important. It's incredibly important. I was able to start research because the Mainzer Stadtarchiv digitized it, and I started to be able to get a little faden that I could start to pull on, and gradually more things came from that. So archives must be open and they must be digitized, but they also must not be, let the archives tell the story that the archives tell, because I think very often people in charge of archives, or where the politicians or the people who are interested in bigger narratives very much want certain narratives to come through and certain other narratives not to come through. But the archives are also political, and the ways in what is open and why is rarely just chance. And what, and it's often very easy to get access to the most tedious archives. The ones where the kind of real meat or the narrative is sometimes, for some reason, harder to find their way to. So I hope that all archives become open. I hope that there is kind of funding to pursue narratives, that when narratives continue into exploring what happened with private collectors or whatever, that there are ways for that research to continue. On a bigger level, I mean, I kind of hope we all survive, you know? I have a grandson. He's kind of very cute. He's quite young. And I'm genuinely really, really concerned about the future that is happening. And I guess one word that hasn't been mentioned yet is the United States of America. But actually, you know, I was reading not the most radical of newspapers, the Financial Times this morning, which is talking about American academics fleeing the United States and either looking to go to Canada or to Europe or what, you know. So there is a genuine, things can happen quite slowly for 60 years, and sometimes they can happen very fast. And I think this is a moment where things are happening very, very fast. And I think we really have to keep our wits about us, to have to protect the things that we consider important. And I think there are many things that we disagree about. I hope there are a few things that we agree about and that we can think that also art is important, but people are also important, and we need to try and find a way to protect them.
Thank you very much. I mean, accessibility of archives is part of the Washington Principles, just to remember. So it should have been, your descriptions, I know exactly what you mean, but this shouldn't be the case. It's, of course, implementation is always the issue of everything. And yes, I think there would be much to say about Smithsonian Institution, truth and sanity for American history and all the executive orders in this regard, but this would maybe be another discussion, important to have, but we cannot afford this. So my question would be now, Konstantin, if you, because this is, let's say, also for the present right now, the images you would like to show. Yeah. Yes. So if we could have them on the screen, please, from the PowerPoint. And you're getting the pointer?
Thank you. I don't want even to point. I just want to remind you realities of these days. Yesterday, when I arrived at the conference, I got a phone call from the National Museum of Ukraine. They were triumphal and festive because yesterday they received this portrait. It's a portrait by, I cannot say major artist, but important artist, Władysław Galimski, painted in 1898 and stolen by the Nazis during the war. Portrait disappeared without trace. In 2012, it popped up at the auction in Stuttgart. Ukrainians unfortunately learned about this in 2018. Ukrainian diplomats asked German police about help, and German police refused to provide any help on the basis that this painting was stolen more than 60 years ago. In the result of joint operation of Ukrainian special services and special services of one of Baltic countries where the painting was located, it was fortunately confiscated and returned to Ukraine. Of course, today for Ukrainians and for museum people, it's a holiday because they are facing another reality. Next slide, please. Next, please. Or I can operate this like this. Yeah, okay. So this is a historical museum in Mariupol, which was looted and burned. And this is the next photograph. This is the halls of the museum after Russian shelling. And this photograph is a unique photograph. We have only one image like this. It's an officer of Russian special forces. We don't know the name of the force. We don't know who is directing this force. Is carrying painting from the burned building of the Mariupol Museum. For me, it's an unbelievable feeling. I was researching the Second World War a half of my life, and now I can see the whole replay of it in my native country. This is a Kherson historical museum. You probably read a lot about looting of Kherson Art Museum, but looting of Kherson Historical Museum is maybe even more important. It's a huge collection, 2 separate buildings. Museum was created in the mid-19th century as archaeological collection, owning extremely important collections of the northern Black Sea Greek colonies, including unique collections of coins, many of which exist in one copy, owning good collection of Scythian gold, which was not mentioned so far in any press after looting of this museum, and many, many other things, including valuable archives of the beginning of the 20th century connected with Ukrainian futurist movement, David and Vladimir Burduk, etc. So here you have interesting comparisons. This is the exposition of the museum before Russian occupation, and this is the same exposition after Russian occupation. This archaeological collection of the museum, this is prehistoric archaeology before Russian occupation. Here, this is the same collection after the Russians left. So we have total unlimited removal of museum collections, which is, of course, supplemented by the private robbery. And in this situation, I want to say one thing and to make one comment, very short one, which is connected with German experience with Russians. And I want to say that I am agreeing with Wolfgang, but at some moment the threshold was crossed. In some moment, Germans, unfortunately, started to accommodate Russians. Germans never opened their mouths when Russians started to appropriate the Second World War. When from the Great Patriotic War, it became Russian war, excluding Ukraine and everybody else. And when today we automatically repeat in definition Russian colleagues, we have to be careful. Better to call them Russian counterparts, because some of these colleagues are de facto military criminals or on the sanction list, so far maybe on Canadian, but tomorrow could be on the list of European Union. I don't believe that in visible future we can imagine any collaboration with Russian Federation. Maybe I am not right, but it's my belief. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So, and I would like also to solicit reactions of the audience to this. First, Adam, you have your, let's say, from your storytelling experience, and also maybe to take us into yet another dimension of making dispossessions somehow palpable, to sense it. And
okay, if I just say a little, I have a
please.
kind of one and a half minute clip of this is a project that was made 2 years ago. Just around the corner, the Berliner Ensemble, in partnership with the Komische Oper Berlin. And it was called Felix's Room. It was about Felix Ganz, my great-grandfather, who sketched the last room that he lived in Mainz before his deportation. And he brought with him what he could. So which pictures he'd bought, which artifacts he'd brought, which photographs he'd bought, and we reconstructed this room using projected LiDAR scan technology to kind of tell the story of his life in the room based on surviving letters which are part of a research project at Royal Holloway. I guess one just extra is that there was one object in the room, which was really in the room, which was discovered by Emily Loeffler's researchers in the Landesmuseum in Mainz, which was a Baroque commode. And the Landesmuseum escorted it to Berlin. It spent a month on the Berliner Ensemble Werkraum stage, and it was also then kind of mic'd up, and it became, one of my colleagues at Royal Holloway writes music for amplified objects, so there is a duet between the singer who played Felix Ganz's second wife, Erna, and the Kommode. So it was both using the research, using the documents, using the stories, but also actually finding a way to bring the object back and perhaps listen to the object. I was always fascinated that this object had witnessed, it had been there. If we believe in some of the kind of fairy tale notions of what an object can sense, that it also had a story to tell. I wanted to give it a voice. It says, Kommode, es lebt dort, wo wir schlafen. And so anyway, this is a clip of a kind of assembly of the project. There should be sound and music.
Was, wenn sie nicht kommen?
Sie werden kommen.
Das Gestapo-Hauptquartier befand sich auf der anderen Straßenseite. Felix konnte sie durch das Fenster sehen. Und sie sahen ihn.
Erster Aufsichtsrat, Kommerzienrat Felix Gott, Felix Gott.
Ich habe nie aufgegeben, Erna, und ich werde das auch jetzt nicht tun. Ich heiße nicht umsonst Felix. Ich schließe, weil ich hoffe, euch bald zu sehen. Seid von uns beiden herzlich gegrüßt.
Man wollte, dass wir gehen.
Wir sind geblieben.
Okay, so what we have done so far in the past 90 minutes is to present a wide array of perspectives, of ways of processing and coping, and this is meant to engage with you. So I would like to solicit all kinds of responses, from outright questions to remarks, comments, associations. Please feel free to voice your concerns, to ask questions if you feel like this. Do I see any hands right now? Not yet. So who is starting? Please. Who's starting? If you need a second to digest this broad range, oh, please go ahead. Yes. There's a micro behind you. Please.
Thank you very much for all your contribution. It was very, very interesting and also moving. We have spoken a lot about Russia and all the things that are now no longer possible, and we don't know how long it will take. But with Poland, there are things that could be possible. I mean, and that's where I would like to throw your attention to. Could we not be inventive? Could we not propose new things with Poland? And I agree with you, this awful sentence about kriegsbedingt verlagerte Kulturgut. I had to write it several times to have it in my mind. Now I have it. But perhaps with Poland, these kriegsverlagerte Kulturgut are just 100 kilometers away from us, you know, and we could connect, we could imagine something new. And my proposal concerns books. So in the catalogue of the Staatsbibliothek, this house which is hosting this wonderful conference, there are many books that are declared as verloren, Kriegsverlust. And many of these books are somewhere else in Poland. And my proposal would be to say, why don't we try or start here with Poland our neighbor, our allied, and try to figure out what happened to this book and could we not create links between these two countries around a shared heritage, a common shared heritage, to speak like in the UNESCO wording.
Thank you very much. There are at least 3 people on the panel, or 4, to answer. But so, please, who's starting?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. As one representative of the host, I would start. I think. Yes, you are right. Our catalogue shows 730,000 entries with the remark "war loss," kriegsbedingt verlagert. Only 25–30% of this book, of these items, got a second copy during the past 80 years since World War II. So there are still great number of books that we do not know. We now have about 12,000 books where we show that they are 18,000 books where we show in our catalogue that we know that they are in Krakow in the Biblioteka Jagiellonska, in the Russian State Library in Moscow, in the Russian Historical Library, or in the Inastranka. I think you are right. This making step-by-step projects together with Polish institutions or other institutions to showing that the works were not destroyed under the war is a very fine idea, and it opens access to researchers from many countries. I know that we have an approximately idea of what is inside these Krakow collections, and when you look our catalogue, you sometimes will find links to the digital library of Krakow of Jagiellonska Biblioteka, when the colleagues in Krakow already have made a digitized copy. And then from our catalogue, you can come to the colleagues. And this, I think, is what I have in mind when I speak about let the experts, let the specialists come in contact. We have a common project had with colleagues from Krakow according the Bach collection. It was already with, it's still with microfilming. We have a very special collection of East Asian manuscripts digitized in cooperation with our colleagues in Krakow. And we have a very successful, had a very successful cooperation according the Humboldt collection, and we are here in the Humboldt room. So these are examples for a very productive cooperation, and I would say it is on a not under radar. So it is not so officially, and we do not speak so loud about it, but we make it. And that is what I think is important, that we cooperate on the basis of these collections, and that is what we try according to this. We will make it step by step, and it takes time, and we always wish it would be faster, and there would be, but for the politicians today, they look only for, in the future to the next election. So this is 3-4 years. And this is no prospect for a collection as ours that is 370 years old. And we look forward, we think in other dimensions, and war is 80 years ago, so we think in other dimensions in time periods. But we try to act in the in the framework of our possibilities, of our opportunities. And I agree with you. We are always looking partners that support these ideas to bring it, to make them coming true.
Yes. So you have to add one thing, namely that in the Staatsbibliothek here or in ZLB, Zentralinstitut, in many libraries in Germany, one does make the provenance research, and if when one finds, let's say, the book from the Polish library, that is simply just on the website. You can read this book is, let's say, in this or another German library. The problem is, and then we have also to name, namely, and it is really ridiculous, but it is also just similar experience of Professor Eichwede, namely these books, if they belong to the Polish libraries, with the one exception, with the exception of the Jewish institutions, they cannot come back, sent by, let's say, the German library, for example, the State Library or ZLB, but they have to be, the Auswärtige Amt has to be informed about such a book. And then it is waiting in the very special package about which I was talking, just for the political idea to exchange it once on the Berlinka. And of course, if you think that Berlinka, this is the special part, they are the most valuable manuscripts or musical manuscripts, or this Nassau or Humboldt autographa, which Humboldt autographa, I know it, just in Krakow, nobody could read it. The only German specialists of the, let's say, handwriting could read and interpret it. So you are talking about the cooperation, but for this cooperation, if one wants really to develop it, one needs on one side specialists, but also at the end the political will. The political will, because it is connected with money. I'm sorry that I'm speaking about such a thing, but we are coming back to money.
Yeah, please. Ulrike, first.
I just... Sorry? Go ahead.
Ladies first.
No, it's just a very short remark to the procedure of digitizing, locating things and digitizing to make them accessible. There's another aspect on this digitizing. This is that it will secure these objects in place, at least, so that they cannot, once a book is located in a library wherever, and in a cooperation whatsoever, it's being digitized and accessible to all the public. There's no way that this piece can disappear and somebody would say it was never here. So this is kind of a protection work also, I would say. That was just the short remark I would like to go.
I wanted not to talking about digitizing and receiving, but to add an element to this story of German-Polish surrealism. Because when I was working in Washington, representative of every cultural institution loves conflicting claims. And we had, and still have, I don't know for how many years, this beautiful volume from in the Library of Congress, which is annually claimed by Poles and Germans. And every director of the Library of Congress started with bill, and I said, very good, go home, decide who owns it, and come back and we will give it back. It's continuing endlessly. So really, Wolfgang's idea about some international thing could be tried on the little ground of Polish-German relations.
Because it is from Breslau.
Yeah, from Breslau. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is again creating this full question about claims from for cultural heritage from so-called new Polish territories, German, Polish, etc. So some solution was possible in this case, I hope.
I will only mention two examples if I have in mind the books. Immediately after the end of the war, or in the early 45 years, the collection or the library of the family York von Wartenburg has been plundered. And it was plundered on the one hand only by soldiers. A lot of books are lost, but it has also been some parts of the library now are in Warsaw, as far as I know. They are in Peter, they are in Moscow, and these it's a collection of a family. It's a special collection. Included the whole library of Tieck, of one of the famous German specialists and literary figures. I think the proposal of the family von York, the family von York, today they no longer live, but the family von Nawojka, to build a foundation and to look for possibilities, how to restore the books, how to guarantee that the books will survive the next generations as they survived the last 400 years. This is a very good one. And the family von Moltke von York, they would agree if the foundation will be in Warsaw or in Breslau or another place. But in any case, it's necessary to know that to restore the books costs a lot. It's a very great, duty we would took, or we will give the foundation. But in any case, the destroyment of this library for the background of the history of this family, resistance, a core of the resistance against Hitler,
yes, of course,
must be taken into account. And today this family would be interested, would be ready to look for a common solution with your country and to include perhaps it's not too difficult, or it has to include the Inner Stranka in Moscow, or more than 400 books are in Peter. But this is not in the first instance a question of the ownership, but the first question, how to guarantee the surviving of the collection. And insofar, I think we must look for new possibilities. The same, if I have in mind, I have shown you the book of the old books of the 16th century in the Inner Stranka, in the Library for Foreign Literature in Moscow. They must be preserved. They must be preserved. And the majority of the books are in German language, in the old German language too. I think it could be correct to discuss whether this is a correct solution that they will stay in Moscow. Because in Moscow there is nobody who would be able to work with these books. In any case, I think having in mind the books, we have the possibility of reproduction and all the possibilities of our new digital world, but the old books of the last centuries, we have to protect them. And this is the main point. And this is more important than the question where the foundation would be.
Yeah, preservation, I think, is key, but also in order, because this is, let's say, micro level, let's zoom out again, go to the macro level, because we have one unresolved tension. Olaf Hamann says, experts, let the experts do it. Nawojka, you are arguing we need the politicians to implement this. So where are we standing with regard to the power of good rational arguments vis-a-vis the necessity, you simply called it money. So where are the resources to have the context for the experts to unfold their shared views about this or that? So I'm wondering, and this is a question also looking at the audience, because I don't see any hands for the time being. Wissenschaft und Politik, scholarship and politics at large will also be, as a small sidestep right now, the topic of a conference in Munich, July 16 to 18. So it's only as a save the date, but program will come up soon. We'll continue the discussion of what can experts do at all and how are they dependent. And Wolfgang Eichwede's keynote lecture was also, let's say, a tainted vision of, let's say, powerlessness of the expert vis-a-vis politician governments, administrations. So I would like to, because the quest for new creative solutions in the field of cultural heritage is what can be achieved, what is in our own room for maneuver in this regard, and where are we dependent, and what are the good arguments we can develop as scholars, scientists, experts, professionals to convince stakeholders to shape the working conditions, including infrastructural elements that are necessary for implementing the new ideas. So this is, since we are lacking questions, I repeat myself from the audience, this is, oh, where's the question? Where, who? Okay, please go ahead.
It's not so much a question, but rather a remark, or maybe also a question, maybe to the organizers of the panel and of the conference, because the title that stands in front of us, Unresolved Problems in the Repatriation of Cultural Property, I think points already to the problem, because the organizers stuck themselves into the discourses of patria, of the fatherlands, and the patrimoine, a very, Vichy, fascist Italy, and so we know where this term comes from. So you raised the question of vocabulary, and maybe we should just simply abandon this term, because we cannot speak about repatriation without having the representatives of the various patria, the politics in place, and that would be the other question: why is there nobody speaking for the cultural administration that had been or for the politicians and the administrations that was so heavily criticized in the talk of Wolfgang Eichwede, for instance?
Wow, a good question. Yes. I cannot respond to this because this was fixed or set up, but I agree with you. But we're going to have let's say, concluding remarks by Gilbert Lupfer, and he will probably respond to that. But I think you're perfectly right. But that would have been a different format, as I understand it. So this was a different idea behind. Nathalie Neumann, please.
Thank you very much for this good panel. And Inga, I would just push it further. It's about also education. And even politicians who have a lot of power, they need education and they need to be in dialogue with the experts, and don't vote for those who do not have an education. And the education should have this message. We share culture, we share global culture, and it's about respect and humanity. And then you can maybe, open the dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we cannot do without a lot of idealism and naivety, perhaps, with regard to this. But this is, echoing also your experiences there. Yes. So, do we have open ends? You took a note, but
yes, I made a note to the words of Nawojka, but you gave the precise answer. When we speak about cultural assets and assets of art, objects of art, to my mind, these are an expression of a kind of universal language. And that can be understood by many people with education. And this is what you meant when you said we need education for our politicians. They usually think within their party programs and election programs and do not have a look at the whole society. And to my mind, the things we are talking about are expression of a more universal language, and we should do anything to open this. We can wait until the politicians pay for this, but it took our library about 25 years before we really installed a provenance researcher in full scale. So when the process started in the mid-1990s, and the full-scale researcher entered our library over this only very late, and over this 25 years, only enthusiasm and interest, personal interest of some of the colleagues was the basis for any progress in these process, and we tried to establish, to find cooperators in other libraries that rose the same question. We were in contact already in the late 1990s with collections, with colleagues from Bremen, from Hanover, from the Berlin City Libraries. So we have a community, and we use this community to establish contacts and to protect and to develop this enthusiasm. What is the basis for such research? And many questions can be only solved only not waiting for money from politicians or from private investors and so on.
Yes, because when I'm speaking about money, it is simply, let's say, to organize cooperations necessary. So you said that one, and of course I'm the first who is, let's say, for the stressing those who have to make decisions from, let's say, from the cooperation and from the groups of people who are really interested in libraries, museums, and so on the real cooperation. But what I want to say, and I agree with you, Natalie, that we need the education among politicians. But I suppose that we mainly need for them the courage. Because the problem is that they are confronted very often with, let's say, populism, with people who just are ready for very simple things like, this is our national property, we never give it back. So only, let's say, the courage of politicians who probably privately even understand the importance of cultural heritage, but they are afraid to say it simply, or to act against, let's say, such a populist vocabulary. This is a problem. This is a problem, I suppose, at least to the great extent.
I think this is why, let's say, the purely rational level of good arguments and of, let's say, professional talk in itself is not strong enough to convince, and we would need more, let's say, the broader or larger horizon to show the degree how it relates to identity issues or production of meaning in general. This is, I mean, if it's cultural heritage, it's about identity, individual identity, collective, national, you name it. And that is maybe the necessity for efforts in this regard to make compelling arguments why this is relevant at all. And I think there has been, at the same time, also progress. I mean, look at the Lost Art Foundation itself. It has 10 times the budget compared to, let's say, 2014 or something. So there has been progress, definitely, but there's still a lot of a long way to go, I believe, in order to solve the problems that you just addressed or that we looked at. So it is some intermediary position I feel we are in right here, and I'm looking forward to someone to contradict me, but this doesn't seem to be the case. So, but please.
Only one word. I think. You listen me?
Yes, we're fine.
To some degree, we are in a totally absurd situation on two levels. First level, in any case, it would be normal to give back artworks who had been plundered. It would be a very normal situation, I think so, in a civilized world. But according to my experience, this will not be possible in the next 100 years. And therefore, we have to look for additional constructions. The plundering remains a crime. But nevertheless, we have to look for solutions how to minimize the following of the plundering. And I think inside the European Union, if I have in mind Poland or Germany, solutions must be possible. It's the expression of our totally stupidity on both sides, excuse me. On both sides.
Excuse me.
On both,
of course. Of course. Whom do you say on both sides?
Yes,
My
because
God.
I'm a polite man, and I admire Poland to some degree. and when I had been a pupil, I read with enthusiasm the book of Leszek Kolakowski, The Human Being Without Alternatives, Der Mensch ohne Alternative. And the last chapter is a chapter, The Priest and the Joker, or the Priester und der Narr. And I think for all the time we have to be on the side of the Joker, not on the priest. We have to look for solutions, to look for the truth, not only to repeat a so-called truth. Well, this is the first level of our absurd world. And the second, we are looking in wonderful proposals for solutions in a time where the nationalism in Europe is growing. And new barriers appear. I'm a little, not only a little, I'm totally afraid. And if I have in mind the biggest country in Europe, Russia, we have a war. And we are looking for possibilities how to solve the problems of the Second World War in a time when one of the main European countries is acting as an aggressor. And insofar, we are in a totally absurd situation. My last word, but I admire Albert Camus, and he taught me that the absurd world is perhaps a possibility to look for new solutions.
Thank you. Adam, you were interrupted.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in comparison, where you talked about stupidities and the European Union, and obviously, as somebody from Great Britain, we're particularly good at being extremely stupid. But I also wanted to pick up on this kind of notion of heritage. I just to think on the kind of progress that I made in discovering a story, and even if, and through that story to be able to kind of pass on an understanding of the family I came from, which was destroyed in all sorts of ways. But from the very first moment I met Christian, who kind of helped me on my way, and there are other people around in the room who've helped in all sorts of ways, that actually the amount of work that the DZK has done, that all the individual researchers have done and are doing, is, I think, huge transformation. I remember reading for the first time the Wiedergutmachung claim by my great aunt, where the fact that she's treated like a criminal for asking what happened to our objects. It's absolutely horrendous to read now. That has changed, but I think the fact that there are so many people kind of helping it, making it possible to reconstruct these histories, to reconstruct the collections, to also kind of think about this actually constant ebb and flow. Objects move around the world, whether it's from Senegal to Germany or from back and forth. And usually, often there are crimes committed in those exchanges, not all the time, but actually, I think thinking about what happens, it's also essential that kind of objects move and change, because that's the only way in which we learn from one another.
Agreed. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the panelists. I would like to thank the audience for keeping with us. And it is my great pleasure to hand over the voice to Gilbert Lupfer for a couple of concluding remarks for the Lost Art Foundation.
Yeah, I have to thank you, Christian, for managing this panel. Thanks to all the panelists for their ideas, for their utopias, for their dystopias. I hope more utopias. Wolfgang, I think you are maybe a little pessimistic. Let's hope that. I think when we look 70, 60 years back, we couldn't imagine that between Germany and France, it's that more or less good neighborhood, good friendship like today. Maybe we will in 50 years, in 40, in 30 years, I hope, we will see that the situation between Germany, Ukraine, Russia, Poland is, well, again, we can't imagine it today, but let's hope that it will improve in the future. More, I think we can't do when hope and work for this with our very pure possibilities. Talking about art, looking that artworks are safe and that artworks will be in public, looking for transparency, looking for justice in our poor way. I think that's we can do. So in this way, thank you to all those who are still here, and to everybody who was here yesterday and today, to all who were and followed us the live stream. I wish you all a good evening. Thank you so much.